Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and I have heard heaps of flat earth arguments. I've heard it all. I've heard some of the best flat earth arguments, and I've heard the absolute worst flat earth arguments. Now surprisingly, there are quite a few arguments for why the earth is flat, but just because there are a whole lot of arguments for something doesn't mean that those arguments are good. So I decided, why not make a tier list, and I think I'm quite qualified to do that, although it is quite tempting to just put everything in F and call it a day. But very much like mobile games, whilst they're all bad, some are better than others, such as Raid Ship. That's a joke, don't click away. Anyway, let's actually get to the tier list and start with F tier. That's better. Anyway, because I haven't annotated this in any way whatsoever and just used images, time to explain what they all mean. So the first one that we've got there is the sextant. And the sextant is one of the worst flat earth arguments ever. It's so bad that I even considered just making a category for it below F just called sextant. And the reason why it's so bad is because you would think that it was measurements taken with the sextant that they're saying proves the flat earth. But no, it's not that. The argument goes that to get an elevation angle from a sextant, you need a horizontal baseline, and that horizontal baseline must be flat, so therefore the Earth is flat. Yes, it is that bad. And the next image that I've got there to represent an argument is quite a simple one, and that's all the water would flow off the ball. I don't need to tell you why that's bad. If you think that's a good argument, well, then I'm glad that you're using your 20 minutes on the computer to watch my videos. Wait, do they allow computers at the psych ward? And the third one that we've got there is water always seeks its level. Yeah, and level doesn't mean flat. And the next one is space is fake. I mean, sometimes they go into more depth, but just in general, they're wrong about that. And the next one is, the United Nations logo has the flat Earth map on it, so the Earth must be flat. I guess the UN forgot that they were supposed to be hiding a secret the day that they created the logo. And the next one is, they're trying to hide God from us, and that's why they say that the Earth is a globe. Despite the fact that, you know, many Christians also believe that the Earth is a globe, and they still believe in God. Gotta say, not a great plan. So the next one is in the same category as the sextant, and that is basically to do with elevation. The argument goes that if you're on the coast of America, let's say, then your elevation will be close to 0. Then if you were to travel to the other side of America and get an elevation profile, you'd see that on the other coast, the elevation would be close to 0. So therefore, they reason there is no curvature. I'm not making this up, by the way. They even use this reasoning to try and say that Google Earth is a flat Earth model. You can't make this up. Obviously what's going on is they think that elevation has something to do with curvature, whereas in reality, elevation has nothing to do with curvature and will not show you curvature. So the next one is to do with midday. And the claim is that on the globe throughout the year, midday should shift throughout the day. And eventually, midnight will be midday. Again, this is them just not understanding that it takes 24 hours not for us to do one rotation, but for us to point back at the sun again. Instead, I'm pretty sure it takes about 23 hours and 56 minutes for us to do one rotation. And the next one is pretty simple. They claim that YouTube is censoring them, and because of this, YouTube clearly knows that the Earth is flat and wants to hide the truth. However, even if we say that, yeah, they're being censored, it doesn't mean that they're being censored because they're telling the truth. It would just mean that they're saying something that YouTube doesn't like. However, again, I don't think that they're being censored. And the next one is, pilots use flat flight charts to fly planes. Which is obviously just not true. Wolfie 6020 has shown that he uses a globe to navigate. Now the next one is, due to curvature, buildings should be leaning away from you from a distance. What people don't seem to realise is that the lean of the buildings away from you is about 1 degree, which isn't all that noticeable, so you wouldn't notice that 1 degree lean of the buildings away from you. And lastly, we have NASA means to deceive in Hebrew, so therefore you can't trust anything NASA says. Now obviously this is a pretty stupid one, but did you know that flat earther actually means idiot in English? So why would I trust flat earthers? Alright, so that is F tier, and honestly it's the largest tier of them all because flat earthers' arguments are generally pretty bad. So let's move on to E. So E, one of my favourite letters of all time. Unfortunately though, I'm not a Sesame Street character, so I don't really get to do anything fun with it. I mean, I probably should have done a Markiplier E, but it's too late now, we're stuck with a plain boring E. Now as I go through these, I know what everyone's going to be thinking. Don't these belong in F? And, well, yeah, but I did need arguments for E, so think of E more like F plus. Or actually, no, think of F like F minus, and then think of E like an actual F. And then D would be F plus. Anyway, the first one there, if you've been following Flat Earth at all, you'll recognise it. It is the Black Swan. It was a photo that was meant to destroy the globe, however it had refraction in it that was so obvious that the cranes in it were bendier than a gymnast without any bones. The next one that we've got is the horizon always rises to eye level. It doesn't, I've tested this out myself, and it just doesn't do that. The third one that we have for E is crepuscular rays, which apparently, because they look like they're diverging, that means that the sun is just above the clouds. Even though, if you're like me and have actually been in a plane flying above the clouds, you look up and realise, oh, the sun is still far above you. There's also a bunch of other reasons why it doesn't make sense, so I actually kind of debated putting this one in F. Anyway, the next one is, if you zoom up on something that has gone over the horizon, apparently you can bring it back into view. This is just simply not true, of course. If something goes over the horizon, there is no way that you can bring it back into view from your elevation. Any evidence that they give for this is always them zooming into something that is just too small to be able to resolve, not something that has actually gone over the horizon. So the next one is pretty complicated, but also kind of dumb. And it's about gravity. So the reasoning goes is that Newton's gravity is no longer valid because Einstein superseded him. And Einstein says that gravity is not a force. And because gravity is not a force, it doesn't exist, I guess? However, none of them will actually be able to tell you why gravity is not actually a force. Next, we've got density. Apparently, you don't need gravity, you just need density and buoyancy. Now, here's the thing. Everything can be explained with a 9.81 meters per second acceleration towards the ground. Flat earthers fail to recognize this because their brains just can't comprehend something like that, because to understand why everything can be explained by that, they'd need to actually think. The next one is Coriolis isn't real, because if Coriolis were real, then X thing would happen. Anytime this argument is brought up, it's because they think that a certain thing would happen because of Coriolis. However, it doesn't really. The one thing that they always fail to do is any kind of calculations to verify that the thing that they're saying is actually something that should happen because of Coriolis. The next thing is they say that there is no evidence whatsoever for Earth's core. This is simply because they haven't actually physically seen it, even though taking a photo of something is not the only way to work out whether something is there. Wonder if they know of ultrasounds. And lastly, we have the moon is not a physical object. For all we know, it could be a hologram. The reason why they say that it's not a physical object is because they can't go up and touch it. And by that logic, anything that you haven't gone and touched for yourself could just be a hologram, right? I mean, the ice wall could just be a hologram to make it look as though water isn't flowing off of the Earth. Checkmate, flat earthers. Alright, that was another tier done. In fact, we're probably already over halfway through the video. Obviously, the majority of flat earth arguments are all going to be in the bottom tiers because they rarely come up with anything good. Anyway, let's go on to the next tier, D. So first up, we've got the age-old argument of perspective. Apparently that's why things are going over the horizon, I guess. It's a pretty bad one, but at least they're trying something. They just need to realize that there is actually a formula for perspective, and when you use that formula, nothing should actually go over the horizon. The next one is, if the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, why don't we all fly off? Again, this is a case of flat earthers not doing any kinds of calculations and just assuming they're right about what would happen. Flat earthers really need to start learning how to do maths, although the last flat earther that actually did that is no longer a flat earther. Hi Ranty! The next argument is that a shadow of something should always be larger than the object that casts the shadow. They reason that because the radius of the umbra of the shadow that the moon casts on the Earth during an eclipse is only 55 kilometers, then the moon cannot have a radius of 1,700 kilometers. Obviously, this fails to account for the fact that the sun is a really giant light source. If the light source is bigger than the object casting the shadow, then the umbra of the shadow will be smaller than the object casting the shadow. Next, we've got Antarctica. There's a lot that I could say about Antarctica, but we're going to focus on the Antarctic Treaty. Flat Earthers say that the Antarctic Treaty stops anyone from going to Antarctica, and the reason for this is because otherwise people would get to see the ice wall. So even though we established earlier that the ice wall is definitely a hologram, Flat Earthers are just adamant that it exists. The problem is though, is that Flat Earthers don't seem to have read the Antarctic Treaty, and once you are in Antarctica, technically you can do what you like. Because Antarctica does not have any laws. Now, if you commit a crime, you will still be tried for it, but only once you return to the country that you are from. But this is not legal advice, so do not commit crimes in Antarctica. So the next argument is that flights all go through the northern hemisphere, even if you want to fly from a place in the southern hemisphere to another place in the southern hemisphere. Unless of course you are flying from New Zealand to Australia or from Australia to New Zealand, but we all know that Australia was just made up to scare kids. So it is true that in a lot of cases, if you want to get from a place like New Zealand to Argentina, then you may have to detour to the northern hemisphere. And this is just simply because there are not a lot of flights that fly direct. So sometimes a stopover flight is better. But there are still direct flights, but Flat Earthers just act like they don't exist or something. And lastly, for D tier, they say that we can't be going through the universe at crazy speeds because Polaris always stays in the same place. In reality, the reason why Polaris appears to stay in the same place is because it's really far away, like light years away. Anyway, getting to the 4 final tiers, and there's not a lot in them to be honest, because there's not a lot of good Flat Earth arguments. Not that these arguments are good, they're just better than the rest. So now, time for tier C. Sounds a little bit like saying TLC. Anyway, first up is photos of planets. Flat Earthers say that when they take photos of planets, they don't look like the NASA photos, so therefore the NASA photos must all be fake. This is simply due to them not knowing how to actually operate a camera, especially when it comes to focus. I mean, just because you might have ADHD doesn't mean that you need to pretend that the camera does as well. But the second thing is, apparently, a rocket hit the dome, and as soon as it hit the dome, it just stopped spinning, rather than, you know, exploding, like what I'd think a rocket would do if it were to hit the dome. Of course, the only footage of this is where the cameras were facing away from where the dome would be, so you don't actually see the rocket hitting the dome, it's just inferred. There are reasons why the rocket went from spinning really fast to spinning really slowly. And it's not because it crashed into the dome. Unfortunately, the Creaky Blinder's head isn't that powerful. Anyway, the last one for this tier is that you cannot have pressure without a container, so therefore Earth must have a dome. This completely ignores the fact, obviously, that as you rise in altitude, the atmospheric pressure does drop, and you're not going through containers to get to higher altitudes. On to tier B. So both of the arguments in this tier are very similar. You've got laser tests over water, and we see too far, apparently. Both of these things ignore the fact that atmospheric refraction can bend light to make things that normally would be hidden visible. When you control for atmospheric refraction, you then get results that are consistent with a globe. Now on to A tier, which in a shocking twist actually has more things than B tier. I know, what a surprise! Anyway, in A tier we have gyroscopes, and this is one of the things that I didn't really touch for a long time when it came to Flat Earth, because it's not really something that I could debunk. The argument went that because gyroscopes don't drift, this means that the Earth is not spinning. Unfortunately for Flat Earthers though, they decided to actually put that to the test.
But what we found is when we turned on that gyroscope, we found that we were picking up a drift. A 15-degree-per-hour drift.
Thanks, Bob. The next argument is the horizon is always flat. Even if you use a high-altitude balloon, you will never see a curved horizon, unless you are using a fisheye lens. This claim is up there because it's one of the more difficult ones, because every time you present Flat Earthers with evidence that the horizon does curve as you rise in elevation, they will always say, well, that's just a fisheye lens, to dismiss it. Problem though is that because of this argument, people like Mr. Sensible have gone to quite extreme lengths to show that they're not using a fisheye lens. However, flat earthers still manage to find new and bizarre ways to just dismiss evidence. Anyway, the last one for A tier is the best A tier argument, and that is SciManDan doesn't have any legs. SciManDan just doesn't have any legs, so obviously any photos of him with legs, the legs were created by NASA, so he must be working for NASA to try and trick everybody. Anyway, the last tier is S tier, and this has the best flat earth argument in it. A flat earth argument that cannot be beaten. Here we go. Earth is a globe. That's the best argument. There we go. Simple. Anyway, that is the video. I guess I can move back now. Don't want to be stuck there until the next video. That sounds horrible. So leave a like and subscribe if you like this video. Leave a comment letting me know if you'd like to see another tier list video. I might end up doing a tier list of flat earthers if enough people are interested. As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons. Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, SHaKie, Wolfie, Morrie, Graymore Ghost, KidVicious, Sacha Campbell, Militant Agnostic, and Elke Loobuyck. If you want to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. There should be a link there. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching.